This week's Parsha is Parsha Emor. Share with you an idea. I think we've discussed this before. I think it's just a very important point. I want to reiterate it. We have a very interesting terminology which I don't believe is repeated. If it is, it's very rare the way the Torah expresses this halacha. We start off talking about the laws of the kohanim. Somebody that is a Kohen is not allowed to come into contact with a dead body. And whatever the insight is that Kohen has a connection to life and cannot come into contact with death. I mean, whatever the hesber behind that, why specifically. But there's 7 exceptions that the Kohen is allowed to contaminate himself for, and he might even be obligated to contaminate himself for. So let's see. It says, "Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Emor el kohanim, bnei Aaron, va'amarta aleihem." It's very strange lashon. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Okay, that's the initial instruction that Hashem gives Moshe. Usually it's daber. Daber, speak. Va'amarta aleihem. Here the Torah changes from the norm. It says, Emor el kohanim, va'amarta aleihem. So why is there this change of going from which normally written daber and then give over, speak to them and say? Here it's Emor va'amarta. And we're going to see different, the Rashi has a pshat over here why there is this change. L'nefesh lo yitama ba'amav. He is not allowed to contaminate himself by coming into contact with a dead person. Ki, except im l'she'ero hakarov elav, to those relatives that are close to him. So who are the 7 relatives that a Kohen is instructed that he should contaminate himself for? Le'imo, his mother, ule'aviv, his father, Livno, his son, Levito, his daughter, Le'achiv, his brother, La'achos absula krova elav, and to his single sister if she's not married. Okay.
But if you find somebody on the road and nobody...
Yeah, it's Meis Mitzvah. Meis Mitzvah everybody's obligated to. But we're talking about here where there are other relatives, there are other people that could take care of it, but still he's required and to go to the funeral as well. So just tell you an idea, a very interesting idea. I always got a kick out of it and I have a bit of a story with it as well. The Ibn Ezra, one of the greatest Sephardic commentators, 700 years, 700, 800 years ago, maybe even more, 11th century. He wants to know, why does it mention going to the funeral of the mother before it mentions going to the funeral of the father? Le'imo ule'aviv. Usually, in the psukim, you find, usually if there's something, it's usually father and mother, unless like we spoke about last week, it changes, then there's a message. So why over here would it put that the Kohen is instructed to go to the funeral of his mother and then the father? So he says something fascinating. He says like this. Now again, bear in mind the time frame and when he lived. So he said that since women bear children, therefore, their bodies are more susceptible because of their weakened state to sicknesses. Therefore, the life expectancy of women is shorter than that of men. And therefore, the first funeral generally will be the funeral for the mother and not the father. Now, obviously, things have changed today. You know, it's not that way. Usually, the life expectancy of women is longer today than that of men. So we'll get into that maybe a different time. But at least in the times of Ibn Ezra, he saw that that's the pshat in the pasuk, why it mentions the Kohen going to the funeral of the mother before it mentions going to the funeral of the father. So So, I said this maybe, as I said, in the 11th century. Many of the commentaries ask the following question of the Ibn Ezra. Very, very powerful question. This is the rules that pertain to the regular Kohen. The regular Kohen is allowed to contaminate himself for 7 relatives. About 20 psukim later, even less, 10 psukim later, he talks about what if he's the Kohen Gadol. Now if he's the Kohen Gadol, then he's even considered to be on a higher level, he's considered to be even more spiritual, even less connected to physicality, to death. He's not allowed to go to the funeral even of 7 relatives. So for sure not allowed to contaminate himself with anybody, but even the Zayin Krovim, the 7 relatives, he's not allowed to cause. Now listen to the words. Kohen Gadol me'echav, the Kohen who is exalted above all his brothers, Asher Yutzak al Rosh Hashem Mishcha, was anointed with the anointing oil, Umilas Yadav, and he was inaugurated Lilbosh Begodim, to wear the special 8 Begodim. All right, as Rosh lo Yifro Begadav lo Yifrom. He's not allowed to show any signs of mourning. He's not allowed to let his hair grow, right? And he's not allowed to tear his clothes. Val kol nafshos meis lo yavo. He's not allowed to contaminate himself for any dead person. And then it lists the ones that he's not allowed to contaminate to. Ule aviv, ule imo lo yitamo. He's not allowed to contaminate himself. So the obvious question is, if the Torah is recording what the norm is, which the first funeral he's going to, so then by the regular Kohen it mentions the first funeral being the mother, and the second funeral being the father. And here it mentions that he's not allowed to go. It says he's not allowed to go to his father. He's not allowed to go to his mother. So the commentaries say it's inconsistent with the interpretation that the Ibn Ezra gave as to why it mentioned mother before father by the regular Kohen. So why not mention mother before father for the same reason? He's not allowed to go to the mother's funeral. He's not allowed to go to the father's. Why does it switch it around? He's not allowed to go to the father's funeral. He's not allowed to go to the mother's. That's the question. Now this question remained dormant for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? There is an interpretation that is offered. There's a sefer that was written by Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal. Was a Rashiva from Slobodka. He was actually he lived in Monsey, but I know Rabbi Stepan was very close with him. Many of the standards that were created here at Emek, Rabbi Stepan had a good relation with Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky and used to call him and get directions on what we should do, how we should do it. He actually told me, and it was very interesting, he told me that the first year that he was hired to work in Emek, I don't know how many years ago was that in terms of when he was first. So it was right before their banquet. And he sees the invitation goes up, and it's a dinner dance. This is the first year that he's at Emek. Dinner dance. It was a mixed dancing. Back in the day, there was so he called Rabbi Kamenetsky. He said, "I'm going to quit. I don't know I didn't realize what I'm getting myself into over here. I'm going to make it either they change it, resend the invitations," and it was like a very prestigious, very wealthy, well-to-do person being honored. And Rabbi Kamenetsky said, let it go. It'll get better. Don't make a big deal about it. You have to know which battles you fight, which battles you don't fight. And he took the job, and it was many years. The building we see here, he built. He was responsible for building this building. Anyway, but Rabbi Kamenetsky, so he says a pshat like this, which doesn't answer the Ibn Ezra, but it does give a difference why we know that in halacha, we have what's called a chazaka. What's a chazaka? A chazaka is called a legal presumption. A legal presumption is that you can determine halacha by making certain legal assumptions. If they're strong enough, they can determine that, for example, there's 18 places within an animal that when you shecht it could be treif. Treif means there's certain blemishes or certain perforations in certain organs, but we only check a couple. Because most animals do not have those type, unless you know that the animal fell from a high fall or had been attacked, you don't have to check it because we rely on the chazaka, we rely on the legal presumption that the animal is kosher. He said, in terms of determining the maternity and paternity of a child, there's also a chazaka that has to be made. The mother, right? We know who the mother is. The mother is born from the child. The father, and there's halachas involved the father, we rely on a legal chazaka, that the assumption is that most children are born from the father, of who the father is. There might be some exceptions, but the majority is Robi Ilos Achar Abal. We assume it's the husband and therefore the child, but it's relying on a legal presumption. It's not 100%. Right? So he says like this, so when the Torah says the Kohen can contaminate himself, he's allowed to. So for sure the mother, because you know for sure it's the mother, but it's telling you even the father, not only the mother, even the father, even though the father might, there's a small percentage of deviation, you can rely on the legal presumption, even the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to contaminate. So for sure it can't contaminate to the father, because there you have to rely on a legal presumption. But even the mother that you know 100%, you still can't. That's the answer. It's a very nice answer to read how the Psukim read, but it doesn't answer the Ibn Ezra. Right? The Ibn Ezra gave a different reason. The Ibn Ezra said it depends on whose funeral he's going to first. The first is the mother, because they have a shorter lifespan. So, about 10 years ago, maybe even less, I came across a sefer. I found a pshat to answer the Ibn Ezra. It was an interpretation offered by a fellow by the name of Rabbi Yankele Gesundheit. Rabbi Yankele Gesundheit was the chief rabbi of Warsaw about 100 years ago. Right? So he says, what's pshat in the Ibn Ezra? I said, unbelievable pshat. He says, how do you understand the Ibn Ezra? So he says like this. He says it's true. The majority of the times you go into a funeral, the regular Kohen, like everybody else, in the times of when, things haven't changed yet, but the norm would be it's the mother first, and that's why. He says, however, the position of Kohen Gadol was usually handed down father to son. So who's the first funeral that the Kohen Gadol is going to go to? Since the position went from father to son, when he became Kohen Gadol, why is he becoming Kohen Gadol? Because his father just died. It means the first funeral that he would have to go to as Kohen Gadol would be the funeral of the father, which is why when it talks about the Kohen Gadol, it puts the father before the mother. I mean, that was a brilliant insight. It took 700 years, somebody came up with it. The story that goes along with it is that when I was on Chav Aleph Adar, was the yortzeit of the Noam Elimelech. We went to Poland. It also happened to be the Siyum Shas. We'd finished the cycle of learning Shas. So I took my two boys, and we went to Poland because we did the Siyum in Lublin. Lublin was the Meir Shapiro, who was the one that came up with the brainchild of Daf Yomi. So that was his yeshiva. So we thought how wonderful it would be to be able to do the Siyum Shas in the yeshiva in Lublin, and it happened to be that the yortzeit of Noam Melech, which everyone goes to his grave in Lezhensk, coincided. So I knew of a group that were going, was a student of mine was taking, so I tagged on. I said, we're going to first stop in Lublin and then drive to Lezhensk. So at midnight we did the Siyum Shas, then we drove through the night, and we ended up in Lezhensk, and we did Tehillim. It was an incredible experience. But we went to Warsaw. Warsaw has one of the largest, if not the largest cemeteries, Jewish cemeteries. There must be close to 500,000 people buried in the, and so we had a guide that was taking us around to see all the different luminaries, and they had brought, there was a group that were davening in a Hasidic shtibel, and they were going for all these, they stopped in different places in Poland, very interesting stories we had, at different Hasidic rebbes, and they would say over a Dvar Torah from all of these places. So we going in Warsaw, and the guide is showing us, and he takes us, and this was the grave of the chief rabbi of Warsaw, Rabbi Yankele Gesundheit. And the Rebbe who was going around, he says, I don't have any divrei Torah of him. I said, I have a dvar Torah of him. And I told over this at the we said over there. But anyway, that was but just backtracking over here. So the point, though, is that we're asking, what does it say over here? Why does it change, deviate the Lashon, that it says, Emor, instead of Daber el kohanim b'nei Aaron, it says, Emor ve'amarta. So listen to Rashi. Emor ve'amarta. Why is there this double Lashon? Lahazir gedolim al haktanim. That the adults are being instructed that they have to give over this, they're being warned to give over this message to their children, who are the children kohanim, that they have to be careful and not contaminate themselves and not come into contact with dead bodies. Lahazir gedolim al haktanim. He brings down to Gemara. So the Mefarshim all deal with is why? How do Chazal? Rashi's quoting a Gemara. He's not making this up on his own. Because it says Emor va'amarta. All the other places where it says Daber va'amarta, speak and you will say over, it's also a double language. And there we don't find that it says, it's instructing the parents to give over that message to the children. All of a sudden over here, it doesn't say Daber v'amarta, it says Emor v'amarta. Oh, you know what? There's a special message to parents that aside for there's a mitzvah of chinuch, we know there's an obligation, everyone has to educate their children, right? We have that. There's an additional warning here. You have to warn the parents to make sure that their children keep this halacha. Why? How do you see it in Emor v'amarta? And why specifically over here when we're talking about the kohanim? Right? Why is this here? So, I think this is a very, very important message that's being taught here, that I think anyone who is chosen to raise their children in a certain way, especially someone is wanting to send their kids to a Torah day school, has obviously made that decision. One of the more difficult aspects of educating children, I guess for all time, but especially now, is we're asking our children to do things that when they look around, they don't see their friends having to do. It's very hard to educate children and have expectations of them that when they look around, they don't see. I know we battle all the time with. We don't feel it's appropriate for a child in elementary, middle school, maybe even high school, to have a smartphone. You don't need to have your own social life, private life, separate from your parents. You don't need to have a phone that opens you up to the world. That's not something that we want you to have. But everybody else has one. It's very difficult to fight a battle where you feel something is in a certain way, then everybody else is doing something different. It's one of the harder parts of education. That's why it is, and sometimes it's very interesting because the dangers are more insidious, depending on how close someone resembles what you do. What I mean by that is that, if somebody that, family, you're friendly, that look the part, and they look, but don't do the certain things, it's much more difficult for a child to say, I understand I can't do what they're doing. Because they look exactly the way you look. They're doing the things you do. They're all walking around dressed like you are, but they're not doing what, that makes it almost more difficult sometimes, is where there's the closer there is, but there's a deviation in certain things. I mean, sometimes you have, certain families, whatever, we're a kiruv school. Wonderful. I'm not concerned that my kid is going to start eating McDonald's, or my kid's going to, start being Mechal Shabbos and Bli Ayin Hara. That's obviously everything's from Hashem. Is because he understands the differences in terms of what our expectations are of him and what his expectations are of him. In fact, my wife and we're more concerned about the parenting of a family in terms of what the kasher. So the Shabbos is because my kid's not. He's not as susceptible to those type of challenges as he would be with certain type of parenting things that we don't see as appropriate in terms of going over and playing in their house and not. If you have a family that they talk the talk, and there's certain things that are going on that are not appropriate there, it makes it sometimes a little more difficult. It's just a problem in chinuch. But it is very, very hard to have expectations of our kids of things that their peers are not keeping. So I think that's the message over here. That's why it's specifically to the kohanim. You're asking kohanim, they have to be careful with tumah, right? And they have to make sure their children are careful with it. No other segment of the Jewish people have that responsibility. No other. Why can't I cut through there? Why can't I walk in there? Why can't I? Because you're a kohen, you can't do. But everybody else is doing it. So the idea of having to specifically give this message over by kohanim, because the kohanim are expecting something of their children that nobody else has that expectation. That's why we need that special exhortation. Emor ala kohanim va'amarta. So we said, so why is it dafka over here? It's very important. This is really very, very critical. It's a very important parenting piece as well. There's a difference between the word daber and emor. What's the difference between daber and emor? Daber, we find throughout Tanakh, is harsher. It's imposition. I'm telling you this is what you have to do. The word daber it's I'm instructing you this is what you have to do.
Usually for the men.
Right? It's something that's much more tougher. It's a tougher thing, right? Right? Emor is I'm telling you, I'm not imposing on you. I'm letting you know. It's a much softer, it's a much kinder way of giving over information. So everywhere else, daber va'amarta, that's not the message for parents to their children. When it's emor va'amarta, that's where the message is over, because it's telling you if you want your children to do those things that are different, what they see around them societally, it's not going to come with imposition. Daber will not work. Daber will not work. It has to be emor. You have to find a nice way. You have to find out a way how to share that information that they're going to want to do it. If you push, it's not going to work. And that's why it's dafka here, emor va'amarta, not daber va'amarta. It's here where that message is. And Rav Moshe Feinstein says a beautiful shot. What the Gemara in Yevamah says, listen to the words, emor va'amarta, it's lahazir gedolim al haktanim. So most people, that's exactly the words that Rashi brings down. What are the words lahazir gedolim al haktanim mean? So most things is that we're telling the adults that they have to warn their children that this is what you have to go ahead and do. He says that's not the message. Lahazir gedolim means it's a warning on the parents. You want your children to do that? You better be careful in how you do it yourself. The lahazir gedolim is if you want your children to take on those extra things that you want them to do, you can't it's not do what I say, not do what I do. It can't be that. That has to be role modeled. The only way those things are going to be important, and I see that all the time. My kid's not interested in learning. Yeah, it's the school's responsibility is to get him motivated, get interested in learning. And excuse me, how much do you learn? I don't learn. Well, if you don't learn, then how do you want your child to be excited about learning? There's the bigger problem, listen carefully, the bigger problem with a child sees a parent not doing something that they require the child to do. It's not, everyone thinks, well, if he's not going to do it because he doesn't see you doing it. It's more than that. If the child does not see the parent doing it, what's the message to the child?
It's not important.
It's not important. How can you make something important for the child if it's important? I remember, I don't know if I ever shared this story. It was an unbelievable story. We used to do a slichos, Saturday night slichos by the Ashkenazim the week of between Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. That week they do slichos by the week before Rosh Hashanah. By the Sephardim they do it all month. By the Ashkenazim we do the Shabbos before. So we used to do Saturday night. We used to do in the local shul, at the big shul in the community. We used to have a learning program And then we used to get pizzas, and the kids, and then we used to do slichus with the kids. It was the high school kids. It was a wonderful program that all came, and everyone was. So I had a child. Interesting. He switched over from one of the yeshiva schools. School hours are a little bit of a modern school, but he went to the yeshiva school. Wasn't working out for him, and I told him when he came over. Usually we do well with kids are going up in this direction. We don't do well when kids are going the other direction. So I did not really want to, take the kid. And they said, no, it'll be fine, whatever. So he comes. This is the first, right beginning of the year. He shows up for the learning, and he's there for the pizza. Comes slichus, I don't see him anywhere. We find out there's a whole group of kids that cut out and went to a party. But he was one of them, and I warned him so I got really upset. It's slichus night, so the guy's going out, and he's partying. So I called the parents in. The father was a frum family. They'd already sent to a yeshiva school. It was like a real... and they're sitting in my office. And the father's like all upset. Slichas, how do you go to a party and slichas? And he's shouting as the father. So the kid says to him, when's the last time you said slichas? Kid turned to the father. He said, when's the last time you went to slichas? I'm listening to the much inside. The father was like, that's it. We can't make expectations of our children that we're not going to be showing that we're willing to take that. And the point is, because if it's important and we want to show them it's important, you role model that. You role model that. And this is at every single level. It's derech eretz. It's the way we speak to each other, speak to our kids, speak to our spouse, the way we treat, treating teachers, the way we speak to teachers. If you want your child to look at the teacher who's going to be the person that's supposed to be giving them connection to life, and the way they hear us talking on the phone to the teacher, how do you expect the kid to have derech eretz towards the teacher? These are all, very basic things but it's lahazir gedolim ala ktanim, that those things that you want from your children, if you aren't careful and don't take them as important in terms of yourself, then you're not going to. I'll tell a story. I always say it over to my new parents. We have the new parents come in. It's a story from the Chavetz Chaim. An unbelievable story from the Chavetz Chaim. Chavetz Chaim says that there was in one of the villages in Radin, there was a doctor that had come up with some type of cure that was helping. There's a sickness that Rahman al-Islam was affecting young children, and if they weren't treated with it, they would die. So he had his little black bag, and he was going for all the villages around the area. He was treating all. They would line up, and he would treat them, and thank God he was saving lots and lots of these children that had been afflicted with it. So one evening, he comes to a certain village, and he's crossing over the bridge to get in, and he gets mugged. Some guy and steals his bag. Comes into the city, has his bag. Next morning, they're all lining up. His bag is gone. It's lost. He sees standing in line the guy that is holding his child was the mugger. So he says to the mugger, he says, listen, I'm not going to get you in trouble, but I can't do anything if I don't have my bag. What did you do with my bag? So the guy looks and starts crying. He says, I opened it up. I didn't see anything of value, and I threw it over the bridge into the river, and it's gone. So he said, well, you took the only thing that I could use to help treat your child. You threw it in the garbage. You threw it away. How do you want me to help your child? So the Chavetz Chaim says, he says that, the thing we want, the teachers that we want, that's the value to educate our child. That's the one thing that we want, we're looking to help us in terms of education. It says, if you take that and you throw it in the garbage, then how do you expect them to be helping you? How do you expect them to be doing what you need to be doing? He says, if you don't see the value in what is there, that what you want, then it's not going to help the parent. Your kids are not going to see the value in it either. And this is Emor v'amarta lahazir gedolim ala ktanim, that the warning is for us. We should have the value in the things we expect of our children. We need to show the importance of the value. And at the end of the day, even you have a shir. I know you have a shir. I remember I asked my Rosh Yeshiva once. I said, "How is that?" The Hebrew Academy. Hebrew Academy was like a very modern Orthodox school. Some kids were learning and connected, and they went on to yeshivas to learn for a year, and before they went. And some kids, no connection at all to learning. I said, "What am I doing wrong?" He says, "Nothing you're doing." He says, I guarantee you, look at the ones that are into the learning. If their fathers even learn once a week, something that there's some connection of the parent to learning. The parents are learning, you'll see that you'll be successful with the kids that are learning. The ones that aren't, you're going to have a much more difficult time getting them turned on to learning. And that's it. L'Hazar Gedolim.